saying that.
Okay, this is Jewish Background of the Bible, Part 13, Modern Israel. It's so long that I had to split it into parts 13 and 14. This is what it's like today, pretty much. Jews at the time of Christ versus, 2022. The time of Christ, the percentage of Roman Empire residents who were Jewish is believed to be from 7 to 15%. A lot of Jews in the Roman Empire. The number of Jews in what they call Palestine was 500,000 to 1 million, about half the population of the land.
At that time?
At that time.
Okay.
Okay, at the time of Christ.
Right.
Actually, in 70 AD, they had 1 million, or at least 1 million killed in Jerusalem. Some others might have gone to Jerusalem for protection. The number of Jews outside the land was 4 to 5 million back then. 80 to 90% of the Jews, so around 10 to 20% of the Jews lived in the land at the time of Christ. Again, these theology books keep calling it Palestine. It wasn't that most Jews were there, it's that most Jews were not there. Now, the number of Jews in the U.S. could have been about 7.5 million in 2020. September 25th, 2022, the number of Jews in the world were 15.3 million. The number of Jews in Israel was 7.08 million. So the percentage of world Jewry in Israel as of September 25th, 2022 is 46%.
That's interesting.
It is. When I was in Israel in the 1970s, I heard stuff like, we knew that most of the Jews were outside of Israel. And in fact, between trips there, I heard that there were more Jews in New York City than there were in Israel, which probably was true back then. Maybe. Israel today. Now, a lot of this is, there's a guy called Odin the Tour Guide on YouTube. He's really good. Now I don't know, anyway. Israel's population is about 9 million today. 7 million Jews and 2 million Israeli Arabs. The Arabs are living in Jaffa, the Galilee. There are Bedouin in the Negev desert. The Arabs living in Israel since 1948 and possessing a blue ID like the Jews. By the way, if you go to Israel, the license plates are colored depending if you're Jewish, Arab, or an international visitor. They know who's in that car.
Wow.
And as Americans, it's like, when you run into this type of thing, it's like, we can't do that where we're from. Yeah, but this is Israel. This isn't the U.S. with a Bill of Rights. Israel doesn't even have a constitution. Arabs are mainly Muslim, and it's not a democratic society when you're Muslim. This does not include, the 2 million Israeli Arabs does not include the Palestinians. The Arabs living in Gaza and the West Bank under control of the Palestinian Authority. Israel today, what is Israel today was ruled by Muslim empires for 800 years. So Arabs are now a minority in a Jewish state. Given the option of living under Palestinian rule, Arabs choose to stay a part of Israel. Hey, they got a lot more rights in Israel, even if they're second-class citizens. They do in any Arab country, and they know it.
Oh.
Arabs have a better life in Israel than in any other Arab state. They know that.
So why do they want to kick up a fuss?
Because according to, I forget his name, but he's a very famous name. He's a British guy, historian, deals with the Middle East. He said the Muslims, once they're in a land, it's theirs. They have to keep it. So the law said they're trying to get it back.
So they're there to try
Yeah.
to exert, they feel like they've become overrun by Jews.
Yeah. This was the problem when Jews started coming back. It was fine at first until they started realizing, the Arabs were realizing, we're not going to be a majority anymore. And actually, it's the same thing when settlers went out west here. The Indians sometimes accepted them, and then the Indians started feeling, hey, these guys are all over the place. We're losing our land. Same thing. Israeli settlements. There are 3 big ones, okay, as far as categories. Kibbutz, it's a communal settlement. Now, they're not really into the kind of communism that they used to be in the old days, at least in most of the kibbutzim. Plural is kibbutzim. I'll get into that more, by the way, in, I believe it's the next presentation, number 14, where we go through numbers. There are 270 of them. Members are kibbutznikim. Now that nik comes from, I guess it's Russian into Yiddish, like nudnik or something like that. Notice the nik. You see that in some words, because modern Hebrew has to take loan words from other languages, and that includes Yiddish, which is a combination of medieval German, Hebrew, and it is written with the Hebrew alphabet, and some Russian and Polish and Slavic syntax, and even when they come to America, they'll start mixing English in. It's a make-it-as-you-go language. They're agricultural collectives modeled after the Russian kolkhoz. Okay? Now, originally, you turned your clothes in and they, everything, you didn't own anything originally in the kibbutz, and slowly they got away from it to where now they're more like covenanted communities for the most part. Now, we'll get into that more later. There's a moshav, plural is moshavim, that's an agricultural cooperative. For instance, I stayed for a bit at Moshav Sde Nitzan in the Negev, back in the days when the Negev wasn't very settled, and because it was 1979. And this is basically English speaking, and all these South Africans and Americans and stuff. So you've got X number of, they don't measure land in acres, they call them dunam. You got X number of dunam of land, you're allowed to do certain things. You can have a surplus in the bank, you can be in debt in the bank, and you're not going to get thrown out. It's a cooperative. You do, in a sense, own and work your own land under certain rules.
Dunam is like how many sand dunes you own?
No, I know you think of that. Well, they talk about the shekel and everything. And when I was first there, it was the lira, the pound, and then they switched. My second time, they were switching to the shekel, and boy, that got the Arabs mad, because that's right out of the Bible.
Yeah.
A settlement town. Now, a settlement town, what you'd have to do is, at least in the old days, when I was there, you get up early in the morning. You go to a settlement town if you want to live there. Get up early in the morning, and by the way, Israel, I spent a night at an Israeli bus station in Jerusalem, what they call the Eged. Eged is the bus line. And in the morning, 6 o'clock, it starts to serve. By 6:30, it is full rush hour. They start earlier there. I have heard that Herod, his office hours were 6 in the morning till 10 in the morning. Okay? Now, you get up early and you open a newspaper, see what apartments are open, and try to get there. Now, these settlement towns are pretty much what's causing a lot of heat in the West Bank right now. But you still are under certain, some of them might not accept you if you're not religious. They tend to be very religious. The first kibbutz was Degania in 1909, south of the Sea of Galilee, which, by the way, is also called Lake Tiberias, the Kinneret because of its shape, which is a musical instrument, the Lake of Gennesaret in Luke 5:1. It's the only one, Luke's the only one who calls it a lake in the entire Bible, because it is a lake, it's not a sea. But Luke knew the sea, and he knew that was not a sea, it was a lake. So when you go through the Gospels, this is why you need 4 Gospels. Okay, people wonder, why are there 4 Gospels? Why not just one super Gospel? Because they're into different groups of people under a different mindset. And Luke is a guy who knew the sea. They now realize that, especially when you look in the book of Acts. It is the lowest freshwater lake on earth, and the second lowest lake in the world. The only lake lower is the saltwater lake called the Dead Sea in English. It's Yam HaMelech, the salt sea in Hebrew. We call it the Dead Sea because pretty much nothing lives there. You're not going to find fish and stuff. Now, I think I have read of some microorganisms they have found. And it's about 35% salt, 50% salt, whatever. I've read different things. And you get out there and tourists go out there, you float. You don't sink because it's so salty. You can get out there, read a newspaper.
Yeah, we did it. We were there.
Yeah, I was out there my first time, and I tried to, I noticed because it's got a sort of a north to south current because the water's coming in from the north and it's evaporating. And I noticed, hey, I'm getting away from my group, so I'm going to swim back, right? I know how to swim. I grew up 10 minutes walk from the ocean. I learned to swim at camp in a pool. So I start doing the breaststroke, and it doesn't do any good. It's like being on a table, so I had to go like this and get back. Second time there, a Persian girl didn't know what she was doing, understand the salt. Had her bathing suit on, she dove in and she came out screaming. Now what happened to me was I get a little salt in my eye. Wow, just, you know, a drop of water was terrible, and in your mouth it's terrible. She dove in, came out screaming. She was okay.
Why was she screaming?
What?
Got in her eyes.
Yeah, with the salt. It gets in your eyes, your mouth, especially your eyes.
I tasted it. I let a little bit in my mouth. I wanted to see how
It's
salty
like
it was,
thick.
but I didn't open my
It's not
eyes.
like water.
Yeah.
It's thick. It's like mushy salt is what it is like.
Yeah.
It's
And there
not
were
water.
chunks of salt.
Yeah, it's slimy.
Salt crystals laying on the bottom.
Well, what they're doing now, it's a lot of the
It's
water
really cool.
that's supposed to be going to the Dead Sea is being used for agriculture. Remember Stalin had this thing where he wanted agriculture and he had waters diverted, so Russia and that place had a great economy. I think they grew cotton and stuff, but then a lake dried up. It's an environmental disaster, and the Dead Sea is becoming that. They evaporate it to get off, you know, to get the minerals and stuff, plus they're using water that would have been going into the Jordan, because Israel doesn't have a lot of rain. So it is something to keep your eye on. It's slimy. Tourists go, they'll put mud packs on them, they think it's healthy. I was in a mall in Chattanooga, and some Israelis around Christmas time, you see Israelis selling the wares. Bought some Dead Sea, some mud stuff from Dead Sea salts. I had an allergic reaction, so I didn't use it again.
Well, aren't they? Well, maybe you'll get into this. That Israel mining all the minerals out of the Dead Sea.
Yeah,
That it has vast wealth.
it'll vast wealth. But the problem is, what's going to happen? In other words, you have an environmental disaster perhaps in the making. You evaporate water. If you take out the minerals, it's one thing. What stays there can get in the air. Think of it, you're drying out a lake. Think of what that can do to the environment. We've had issues like that in other parts of the world. The kibbutzim of yesteryear. Well, the kibbutz system ran into hard times in the 1970s. Back when I was there, you couldn't even own a car. You know, it had started out as a commune. Even your clothes are communal. It was
That'd be
great.
Awful.
Huh?
That'd be terrible. Your clothes
Well,
would be
you know what okay. They started getting away from it. Now, from what I've read, and when I say from what I've read, it's because it's not me that I've read it. It's just this is one source. And you know, you read other sources and you hear different angles and stuff. But some kibbutzim, the women started complaining, we want our own blouses. I mean, you went into a lot of these early ones. You went in and you could have a favorite sweater. You had to turn it in. It wasn't yours anymore. And then you go to the storeroom or storehouse. You know, here's your clothing for the week. Now, we still had that when I was in Israel, but if something was really yours, it was yours. But I think our work clothes are more communal. But they started putting numbers on them, and I can remember putting numbers on my clothes with an indelible marker because the laundry was done together. And they just got away from it. Then eventually people started eating in their own homes kind of secretly, and because they always ate in the common cafeteria. On and on. We're going to hit that. But I said it was great in the old days because it was socialism without the totalitarianism. You didn't have a boss making money off you. You know, you had worked all day, maybe in the early kibbutzim, you danced in the Hoda at night, but also you're having meetings that you're going to do cows tomorrow, you're going to do chickens tomorrow. Okay, they have these meetings, very egalitarian. Yeah, one guy might be running the chickens, sort of, especially if you're a volunteer or an ulpanist, you know, you're working 4 hours a day, studying Hebrew 4 hours a day. But basically he doesn't own it, you're not making money off it. He's not making money off you. So different than the American way. This is kibbutz. I've shown that before. That's my ulpan picture from 1979. There's me. And I could identify a lot of these people and at least tell you what countries they came from.
That looks so much
But that
better.
was an ulpan. You work 4 hours a day, you study Hebrew half a day. 4 hours in the morning, work 4 hours of Hebrew in the afternoon, then the next week it changes. You go back and forth like that. They had 2 classes, Aleph Bet, for it's about 5.5 months. And then the second 5.5 months is Gimel. So we have both together in that picture. Plus they send you to a seminar in your native language at your kibbutz movement headquarters. That's 2 or 3 days. It takes some trips, sometimes for a day, sometimes a couple of days. Both times we went up Masada. First time we took the tramway up and I walked down and then got yelled at because I was late for lunch. you know, some of my friends. And second time, we all just walked up and down. And, you know, you get up like 4 in the morning to do this before it gets too hot. Anyway, kibbutzim today, 270 of them. There are 40 to more than 1,000 members per kibbutz today. 117,300 members in 2000. A large percentage of military officers come from these kibbutzim. 130,000 members at latest count, 2.5% of the population. Now, it used to be higher, might have been 25% of the population. You know, as Israel, like around 1948, something like that. Yet 33% of farm produce and 6.3% of manufactured goods come off the kibbutzim.
Now, are these located like up on the top of mountain areas?
No, they're all over the country.
They're just random.
They're wherever they can build one.
And I remember, I think that our tour guide pointed some out to us that were up high on top of mountains.
On high hills, not mountains per se, but, you know, top of ridges.
Yeah. As long as you can farm
You
there.
see a group of white houses, you know, all clustered together.
Yeah, they started out completely agricultural. Then they started bringing in industry and to some of them, and you know, they even do tourism and now high tech, a whole bunch of things. It's direct democracy today. Rotations, they call it tuhanut. This is what it was like when I was there. You're a kibbutz member, which of course I wasn't. I was just there temporarily. Okay, you might be working the chickens all the time because you understand chickens. Well, guess what? You got, I think it's 3 months of dishwashing duty. Tuhanut. This is a country that drafts everybody, including the women. Now, there are some people that get exemptions. This is a country that you have reserve duty every year, okay, after you're drafted. Now, if you're a woman, at least when I was there, it was until you're 26 and married, whichever comes first. Men, back when I was there, I think they even went up to 55. I think they might have brought that down. But you could be a doctor, you could be a lawyer, and you're going to reserve duty every year. Very egalitarian society, which is just the opposite of the Arabs. The Arabs, you know, the sheikh on top, whatever, that's what matters. I'll tell you right now, hope you won't get mad at me. I've lived in the north, I've lived in the south. Okay?
Here?
Yeah, in the U.S. The north reminds me of Israel. The south reminds me of the Arabs. Because I've been on jobs, and in the south, even academic jobs, PhD teach as a department head in a Christian university in Chattanooga. What the boss says matters. Up north, it's not like that. Very much less so. It is your idea worth listening to or is it not? It's not meant to be an insult, but believe me, I've spent a lot of time in both parts of our country, and I've seen this huge difference. And it is there. It is not imagined. It's much more salient with Arabs versus Jews. Okay? It really is. But it's like that in different, I've lived in different regions of the country. 10 states plus the state of mass confusion, I tell my wife. And it really is. Up north, you can talk back to your boss. I've done it, you know. You're not going to get fired. Down here, the boss is always right. And I don't care if it's a white-collar PhD job. And I have seen that far too many times. That's Bible Belt culture. One of the problems is that you've got some guy in the top, and what he says is it. Period. I won't get into details, and I'm not trying to insult anybody, even though I probably insulted everybody in this room. But it really is. I had to watch it because I married a Texan, you know, with my in-laws. Anyway, women now want to do women's work. Okay? Well, here's what it is. The early kibbutzim, the idea was we're all equals, men and women. So women can go out and work like the men. They don't want to be tied down raising kids. Now, so the kids were raised communally. But who does the raising? Women. And they spend a lot of time in the kitchen while the men are out in the fields. They're the ones plucking the chickens or whatever. And the women were feeling, wait a minute, we're supposed to be equal, and we're raising the kids communally. We're in the kitchen, the guys are out there, it's not quite working. And so women eventually now when I was there, kids were raised communally in a children's house. It's called a Bet Yuladim. You might have seen your kid every day. You might have had them at home on the weekends or something, but basically they were raised communally with their own age group. They've pretty well gotten away from that now. Women are saying, oh, we want to raise our own kids, not everybody else's. But but then the women now, believe it or not, they want to get back into what is traditionally a women's role. They're getting so far away from that early communism and socialism they had. They want to be involved with health. They want to be involved with education and other services, which are traditionally women's occupations. It's come, you talk about full circle. It's gone different ways there. I mean, you started out where everyone was equal, but really not, because the idea was the women can do anything a guy can do. Well, the women have to raise the kids, and the women were in the kitchen, and the guys were out there in the fields and stuff. And and then it got to where women were sick of raising everyone else's kids, and so it became more and more just like a normal society. And with women now wanting to do what the men do, wanting to do what women normally do. There's more family emphasis now. They have regional kibbutz high schools. You have credit, not money. More individual choices now. Volunteers. They used to use Arabs. You'd see groups of Arabs working in the kibbutz because there weren't enough people. I don't think they do that very much anymore. There's much more hostility between the Jews and the Arabs. When I was there, it wasn't anywhere near as bad. It really got bad in the first Intifada, but I was there before then.
Back up there, credit, not money. What does that mean?
In other words, if I'm buying something on the kibbutz, I don't have to open a wallet and give money, but it's like, okay, this is, it's almost kind of like what we do with auto deposit in our cards these days. In other words, you have a certain credit. You have worked, we're crediting your account for something, and you use that credit when you buy something in the kibbutz, as opposed to money that's transferable anywhere in the country. Differential pay now is making huh?
Okay, then how do they get money so they can put gas in the car and drive somewhere? Or
probably the kibbutz has its own gas station or something. You remember, you don't own your car. You didn't in the early days.
Okay.
And now, I don't know exactly how they do it. I think it's getting more towards our type of economy. Okay.
So how would the kibbutz pay for the gas for the person who's
I don't even
bringing it in?
Well, right now you
have money from somewhere.
can. I know, and I don't know exactly how that works. These things are changing. So as I read about them, I see these statements and I see videos and everything, and it's changing. But it is still, I think, somewhat based on credit. It's probably based more and more on money now. I mean, I want to go back and see this because, anyways, differential pay now. It used to be everyone's paid the same. You know, you got food, clothing, shelter, education, which you argued your way into at times. And, you know, as far as post-secondary education, after you did your service in the military. And like we would, on the Ulpan, we would get coupons to use in the store. See, that would be the credit thing. We got coupons we can use in the kibbutz store, which is kind of like a snack shop, general store type thing. And right now, you know, if you're doing different work, they pay you differently. At least for the most part. There are a few socialistic kibbutzim left. They're probably not doing it there. In other words, it's getting more and more just like a covenanted community. 15, now remember, 270 of them, 15 are religious. The old socialistic utopian views of yesteryear are gone. They originally started out, the Ganya and the early kibbutzim were all agricultural. Then they started out in industry. When I was there, I can remember they put us on like a small bus, like a school bus, down the road to another kibbutz to work for 4 hours in a factory, furniture factory. They started adding industry because the profit margin is so much greater. Agriculture, you're dealing with like a 2% profit margin. Industry, it might be 25, 30%, something like that. But I don't think any of them ever became completely industrial, at least not when I was there. They would add things to agriculture. Industry is now there. Tourism has been added. I've even read about some other more like high-tech things. Israel now has had a high-tech revolution which did not exist when I was there in the 70s. There used to be 3 kibbutz movements. Now again, today there are 270 kibbutzim, and let's just use that number anyway. There was a communist movement, a socialist movement, and a religious movement. Now, the communist and socialist movements have combined. There's a religious movement, but there's also an ultra-Orthodox movement. So they still got 3 main movements. Now, I've also read about sustainable agriculture movement. I don't know if that's a 4th movement or if it's just part of what these others do. It's hard getting all the information in one thing. Kibbutz information, here's a book, and here's a book, and then this is what it used to be like, and this is, that book I showed you, I think was written in 1992, about the one I had to get through interlibrary loan, and it's great. But things have changed since 1992. Sustainable agriculture is becoming a bigger thing there, especially with the water problems and everything. And they're brilliant in what they can do. I mean, when I was there, you'd have apples. That's a cold weather fruit. Growing next to bananas. That's a tropical fruit. Where else in the world do they do that? Kibbutzim that make money can afford to be socialistic. And they get the money generally from non-agricultural enterprises. It's the same in America. The profit margin in agriculture is not very big. It is much more so in things like industry. Kids are not raised communally these days. Maybe in a few highly socialistic ones, I'm not sure. But you get real salaries, you get small living quarters in large common areas with few roads, which I think is kind of neat. I was living in Maryland with my wife during my postdoctoral fellowship, and you could go about a block into a subdivision with no sidewalks at all. I guess they figure everyone's driving. We didn't have a car. We had flown from Alaska, stayed with my parents in Massachusetts for 2 weeks, and then flew to Maryland. And we were both suffering from multiple student loan complexes to the tune of $900 a month. We couldn't afford one. And you go into a neighborhood where they figure everyone's driving, probably because you can put more houses there. I mean, it gets crazy. But I like it when you get large common areas with few roads. I think Europeans tend to get into this too, a little more than Americans do. There's an old picture of Israeli women. Yeah, they did go out in the fields. They weren't all in the kitchen. That's an old picture too. This is a more modern picture. Yes, they do get drafted. And now they're sending them, I think, into active combat. They certainly train them for it. What they had was basically a mass rape and murder during one of their wars, and after that they said, okay, our women soldiers are not going into active combat. But now I believe that has changed. Again, you can see, last school shooting in Israel was 1974. Matlot. And that was Arab terrorists. Okay, now, I have read that there have been 2 attempts since then, and they were able to neutralize the shooters. Again, stuff might have happened since I heard that. Okay, it's a very different society than we've got. Everyone's armed. Now, actually,
Anybody can walk around with a gun?
pretty much, now what they've done is they've told the soldiers you cannot take your guns home when you're not on duty. This is what I've read. And the suicide rate has gone down because of that. Okay? But pretty much it's an armed place. You've got to be. I remember seeing this guy on top of Masada when I was first there. And he looked like he was about 50-something. Back in those days, that was old. And he had a sidearm, like I think a revolver. And I'm thinking, okay, this guy looks like way up in his 50s. I mean, he obviously had been there in 67, probably 48, unless he was a recent immigrant. And just looking at him, it's like no one was going to mess with him. And he wasn't even a soldier. And you typically see this, especially where the settlers are in the settlement towns, the so-called illegal settlements in the West Bank, whatever, because they have to be armed. Now, again, soldiers not bringing their weapons, those would be much bigger caliber guns, as you can see.
Seems like that'd be dangerous for them, though, if they're on their way home wearing a uniform and they could be attacked by the terrorist people,
True. And if they're
Could they
not
have
armed,
personal firearms?
probably.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know but exactly how that works now. If you're going home without, nowadays you see a woman in a khaki skirt, army uniform khaki skirt, and a Uzi slung over her shoulder. Maybe, and they're always hitchhiking, because you go home for the weekend or something when you're on reserve duty or in the army. You can often do that. By the way, they don't hitchhike like this. You go like, you point down to the road at an angle. I think this might be an insult or something. But there's a lot of hitchhiking, at least when I was there. And the soldiers get priority. You can be at a hitchhiking place and as soldiers come, they pick them up first. Because they know probably soldiers are respected in a place where security's, it reminds me of where I work in a prison. Security's a constant issue. I mean, our prison exists for security. Ethnic groups in Israel. In the Galilee, they lived together peaceably. There were more tensions in Jerusalem. Jews, Christians, Muslims, Druze. We don't know much about Druze religion because they don't talk about it. Circassians and Baha'is. And Baha'i, by the way, they get their big, I think it's an international headquarters in Haifa.
Aren't they the ones with the turbans?
I'm not sure.
Who are the Circassians?
I don't even know. I think, I'm not sure what some of these groups really are into. Religion in Israel today, 2022, okay? 73.6% are Jewish, 18.1% are Muslim, 1.9% are Christian, 1.6% are Druze. The remaining 4.8% included faiths such as Samaritanism. By the way, they still sacrifice out in Mount Gerizim. They don't have a temple anymore. John Hyrcanus I destroyed their temple. But I was in National Geographic decades ago. They showed a sacrifice on Mount Gerizim, Samaritans. Not that many of them. Baha'i, as well as religiously unclassified. So just looking at that, you're talking about 3/4 Jewish and a 1/4 mainly Muslim, but everything else.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
I remember hearing that most Jews are non-religious in Israel. So on your list there, you've got 73% Jewish under a religious affiliation. So does that mean, like what I heard maybe means that they're not actively participating in religious, Shabbat and things like that?
About 3/4 call themselves secular Jews. Now that's included in that 73.6%.
Okay.
They say, I'm Jewish, they'll say, but I don't practice it,
So
I got
75%
circumcised.
of the 73%
Yeah,
are non-religious.
right. And about 25% are religious, but the Orthodox proportion is going up because they have such a high birth rate. Yeah, Circassian. I think I looked it up. I can't remember what it is. Religion in Israel today is a growing number of Messianic Jews. Now, there's a big thing in Israel right now. They wanted to make it basically illegal to talk about Jesus or something. Netanyahu's trying to stop that. What it is you got to form a coalition to have a government. It's not like our two-party system. And these religious Jews, because they vote, they're voting in their religious friends, and they're becoming a higher and higher percentage of the population. And those Orthodox men, they don't like missionaries. They don't like Christians. At least Christianity. There's pressure that's put on Messianic Jews. The Orthodox Jews, now I got to say Jews because Orthodoxy cannot, Orthodox Christianity is also in that part of the world. The Orthodox Jews put pressure on other Jews to become more Orthodox. Okay? They don't want people converting to Judaism, but if you're Jewish, they'll put the pressure on you. I was there in 1975, and a guy named Meir Schuster, he must have been from New York. He could approach me. I could tell by his accent, probably New York, New Jersey or something. And he's telling me to put on the tefillin and everything. And he was known, one guy told me he brought in 1,000 Olim into the country. Now, Olim means immigrants. I don't know if that's true, but he was kind of famous. They meet you at the Wailing Wall, and if you're Jewish, they're going to try to convince you to be more Jewish. I was there later, and somebody, it might have been the same guy, but he wanted me to spend some time at the Tannenbaum Institute for Judaic Studies, have a meal with the Jewish family, blah, blah, blah. They really try to get you into their circle if you're Jewish. If you're not Jewish, they do not try to convert you.
Did you lead them to Christ?
No. The Wailing Wall, it's called suicide. What?
You said they don't want people converting to Judaism.
They,
Meaning, what does that mean? Like,
in other words, if you're a Christian, they're not looking for you to convert to Judaism.
would they try to reject you if you did? I'm thinking of Trump's daughter.
Oh.
You know, she
I
married Kushner and
don't think so. When my mother, okay, you know what a bar mitzvah is? When you're 13 years old, a boy, you go up to the bima. They don't call it a pulpit. Well, they didn't have it for girls when my mother was young. So she had hers done, I think she was in her 70s. And along with some other older women, and one of the women was a convert from Catholicism to Judaism. And they don't reject you, I don't think. It's just they're not looking, they might be a little
they're
suspicious.
not evangelistic.
Yeah, they're not evangelistic.
Okay.
Haven't been supposedly since Constantine's day, according to one of my nieces. I went to her bat mitzvah and she mentioned this I think she mentioned this in her speech or something. I think that's where I heard it. But they haven't. I mean, they were looking for maybe, I don't know if they ever really were strong into converting other people to Judaism. People could convert. Well, in the days of Jesus, you had Jews, you had proselytes. They were Gentiles that became full-fledged Jews, circumcised if they're male. And you had the God-fearers who would go to the services and, Jewish services, and they kind of liked the morality. You got to realize what the paganism was like in those days. And yet they did not even become proselytes, especially the men, because you had to get circumcised as an adult. And it doesn't seem to have been discouraged. Now, Jesus talks about the Pharisees, crossing sea and land to make a proselyte of somebody, but it's probably just someone Jewish maybe becoming more Jewish. I don't know exactly what that means. Jewish evangelism to Judaism is something I've never really heard ever done, except that verse in the Bible, and you got to wonder what that really was. The Orthodox keep to themselves, so they get a high birth rate. I mean, you're talking in Williamsburg, New York, the Hasidim is 13, 14 kids sometimes.
Ooh.
What they're trying to replace the 6 million that Hitler wiped out, which is allowing them to become a greater proportion of the Israeli population, because the secular Jews, as they call themselves, are not going to have 13 or 14 kids. By the way, I have a Christian friend I met in Israel. She's a Gentile, probably a year or two older than I am. And her boyfriend would visit on the kibbutz. Now, this lady's French. Her boyfriend was of Dutch ancestry, Dutch, but living in France. So he had a Dutch name, but he could speak French, and he became a pilot. And I still communicate with him. 15 kids. 15 kids. They show me a picture. We got 15 kids now here at somebody's wedding or something. And then, they're not Jewish, but it's rare, especially among the secular Jews. Actually, though, I think it might happen without birth control. Just because of someone I've talked to, and I'm one of 19 kids or something like that. So it can still happen. Israeli politics. The Knesset is like our Congress, but it's unicameral, one house, not two houses. We have the House of Representatives and the Senate. It's Israel's legislature. It took its name and fixed its membership at 120 from the Knesset Hagadolah, Great Assembly, the representative Jewish council convened in Jerusalem by Ezra and Nehemiah in the 5th century BC. Okay, that's where they get it from, 120 people. It includes Arabs and Muslims and Druze. You don't have to be Jewish, you just have to get elected. There is a religious party. Israel has no civil marriage. Opposite of France, by the way, they have no religious marriage. In France, you have to get married in front of a civil authority, unless they've changed that, which I doubt they have. Israel, if I'm Jewish and I want to marry a Gentile, when I was there, you got on a boat and you went to Cyprus for the wedding. Because you could not marry, a Jew and Gentile could not get married. It was our religious marriage. I do not believe that has changed. Again, I often speak sort of my historical past because things have changed, but that I don't believe has. There's no civil marriage. It's a multi-party system. The prime minister has the power, which is probably true in a lot of almost any country with a prime minister. The president is a figurehead. He's also the Minister of Defense and Foreign Affairs. The president, again, is more of a figurehead. He has little political power. It's mainly, well, he can grant pardons. Now, I read that he appoints judges to the Supreme Court. A friend of mine living in Jerusalem said no, he confirms them. They're not chosen by democratic means. It's like who your friends are. We call the good old boy mentality. Now, whether that's an exaggeration or not, I'm not sure of because of the source. Okay? In other words, it's not really democratic means you kind of, get your friend in. So the president simply confirms the judge, not appoints. I don't know the details. It's just one source. The president appoints ambassadors and appoints the state comptroller. He oversees the budgets and the functions of all public bodies. It's probably like England, who's got the power, the prime minister or this queen or something, Anyway, Israel today, it's no longer just the pioneers, the kibbutzim, is what they call them. A lot of science and technology, very high tech. 2 or 3 cell phones apiece, so it's more than 100% cell phone penetration. A lot of entrepreneurs, a great startup culture, partly because of when you're in the Army, you got to make decisions at the bottom level. It is not top-down leadership in the Army. You do not salute your commanding officer. You call him or her by the first name. Very different than America. A lot of businesses on the NASDAQ. I think that might be number 2 in the world. I have to check again. The military, they got central planning, but execution is decentralized. So they can make decisions in the field. So then they go into business, and that's what you're doing. Everyone except the ultra-Orthodox and the Palestinians serves in the military. It starts from the bottom, then promotions can come. See, I love that thing. I mean, to me, yeah, education matters, and I got plenty of it, but you've got to start at the bottom. Okay? I really believe that. That's what we do at the prison. You start out as the CO, correctional officer, and you can go up, CO1, CO2, corporal, sergeant, lieutenant, captain, and you can be maybe, major, associate warden. This idea where people come in, America's notorious for this. Books have been written on it. Read the Peter Principle. Read the Dilbert Principle. Read Peter, Dilbert, there's another one, Putz Law. Okay, basically what we do is we'll often promote people to where they are no longer competent and they don't go up any higher, but they're holding a post that they can't do right. But what you got is people on the top, especially in technology, they're supervising people below them, and the people below them know the technology. The people at the top don't even know it. Americans don't even listen to their own workers. That book, Why America Doesn't Work, by Chuck Colson Prison Ministries, Watergate Break-In, and Jack Eckert as an Eckert Drug Source points that out. And that's an old book, and that's what I've seen as I've worked in different countries. We get a real prima donna mentality when it comes to leadership. It stinks. I'll say the American system.
With the younger people.
Yeah, it's really, but little sense of authority in businesses. You get a power distance index. Israel is in the lowest, so it's the least hierarchical culture on the planet. This clashes with many circles of Christianity. The Bible Belt, we're right in the middle of the Bible Belt. And Bible Belt, Bible schools and stuff, they tend to be very heavy into authority. So it clashes with the American Christian culture. No matter how many Christians are pro-Israel, it really clashes with, the fact that so many of the seminaries and stuff are really in this part of the country.
Could you please explain power distance index, what you mean by that?
It's something, it's a number I guess they come up with. If you're hierarchical, very hierarchical, bosses tell the others what to do, you're on one part of the index. Israel, high up on the index. Israel is low. You don't have bosses running the show as much as you do in other places. But you can see the culture clash of the American Bible Belt. I mean, I've lived here, I've worked here as a professor in Christian universities. I remember one that I went to and taught at, and we had a meeting of all the new people. And we were a bunch of PhDs and masters, and I mentioned the story of the guy who trained me at the mattress factory telling me that he had told the boss, I'm not going to do what you tell me to do, I'm going to do what's right, as I remember the story. And anyway, he was certainly making more money than any of us. The boss respected and kept giving him raises. And I said, and this is a bunch of us, we're all up there, at least the masters teaching the university. I said, what do you do if your boss has you do something that's wrong? Dead silence for a second. Then I hear, you're not in Kansas anymore. That was the answer. That was the answer. At a university so good that when SACS came through, Southern Association of Colleges and Schools, the most difficult accreditation bureau in the country, College Accreditation Bureau, back in those days, there were 6 regional ones, and those are the good ones. Now there are 7. SACS is the hardest. SACS came through that university, had no recommendations, no suggestions, and that's unheard of. That's how good a university it was. Union University in Jackson, Tennessee. I was there in 2008 when the tornado ripped through the university. Missed me by 100 yards. Good thing I parked my car where I did, or I wouldn't have had it. Bunch of cars and pickup trucks all just thrown up like this. No one killed, but some serious injuries. But anyway, up north, I mean, it's just like down here, it's an autocratic, I mean, I know I'm insulting everyone in this room but myself, but it's an autocratic society that we have here in the United States, but especially where the Bible Belt is, where they're training all these people to go all over the country. I was in a group in Massachusetts, which was really weird because it was a Bible Belt type church right in Massachusetts. But it was very heavy on authority, very heavy. And it's a culture just the opposite of Israel. Israeli citizens are the most flexible. You know, you got to go into the military, and then you learn to do things from the low levels and to work your way up if you want to stay in the military as a career. Who does not go into the Army? Actually, there's the Army, which includes the Army and the Air Force and the Navy. So, any expatriates, you know, if you're in Israel and you're living in California, they don't make you come back for your yearly duties or whatever, you know, your reserve duty. People with medical or psychological reasons, obviously you don't want them in the military carrying guns. For women, if you happen to get married, you no longer have to do your reserve duty, or you're pregnant, or you're a parent. Exemptions for religious reasons, for women only. Now this is where I'm getting contradictory information, so it's probably changing, they're probably still fighting over it. The Orthodox were allowed to not have to be in the military. You know, you got to maybe travel on the Sabbath, the food's not kosher enough. I think several years ago they said, oh, you're coming in, and they changed the law. I don't know exactly what's going on. As I try to trace what's going on, you know, you're getting information from different times. Here it says for women only. That was one source I read. I think some of the men still might not have to go in for religious reasons. But I think the law is now that all the men, even the Orthodox, have to go in. Exemption on the grounds of conscience, which is relatively rare. Both men and women, and they're usually ordered to spend a sentence in a military jail before being granted this exemption. Studying in a yeshiva, well actually it's yeshiva, you know, Hebrew, modern Hebrew likes to accent the last syllable most of the time, which makes it hard when you're bringing it into English. But that is a religious academy. That's where they, you know, you see a bunch of guys in a room and they get their books open and they're studying and kind of davening sometimes, is what they call that. You might allow the postponement of the recruitment in 6 months, and after that one might be more easily granted a postponement for an additional 6 months and so on, without any limitation, as long as the student continues his studies in the yeshiva, and this is only for men. Now this is the latest information I have. I still think they're probably arguing about it. Some young people are exempted for holding a criminal record. There was a guy in the U.S. who was truant at 12 years old, so the U.S. military would not take him. So it's not just Israel. Yeah, I heard this on the radio living in San Antonio. 12 years old, he's truant, he wants to get in the military. No, he's a criminal. You know, in the old days, it was like, go to jail or join the army. It's just the opposite now.
I bet they'll get away from it because enlistment's dropping like a rock. Nobody wants to be in the army right now. In the
Why
military.
not? We're not at war. Usually it's peacetime if everyone wants to join.
Yeah.
Well, right now, just trying to staff anything, including a fast food joint. I think COVID got people out of the work habit. I don't know how they're surviving. Arab citizens of Israel, they make up a little under 1/5 of the country's population. They don't have to. There actually are, I saw one video where it's like about 100 Arabs in Jerusalem, blah, 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 are in the Israeli army. It's not very many. And again, this information is dated, it keeps changing. Modern cause of resentment. And let me grab some water. This, Israel always knew that they had a bunch of Orthodox Jews and that they like to pray and study and don't necessarily want to go into the military. With some of them saying, only the Messiah can really get us back here. We shouldn't be setting up this country. Well, if you don't like it, leave, I guess. But
Yeah.
there's actually one very extreme group. They'll drape themselves with Palestinian flags and the religious Jews and meet with some of the top Arab leaders. I've seen a picture of this. They got the flags right in front of them or something. It's very extreme and not really appreciated by most Israelis.
They're Jews?
Yeah, they're Jews. They're
wrap
Orthodox
themselves in
Jews.
Palestinian flags?
Because only we're here in
Oh.
Palestine, Now it's really extreme and there aren't too many of them.
Yeah.
I don't think they were wrapped in flags. I saw the picture. I think it was in front of them or something. As they're meeting with top Arab leaders. Here's what can cause resentment. Memorial Day in Israel, Yom HaZikaron. Now, this year it's the evening. Remember, they're going by their solar calendar. It's not a lunar calendar. The Muslims go by a lunar calendar. That's why their holidays can occur at any time of the year, including Ramadan. It's solar. It's based on the lunar calendar, but it's corrected with leap years and everything for the solar calendar. It's the evening of Monday, April 24th this year to the evening of Tuesday, April 25th. It ends at sunset. And it's immediately followed by the onset of Independence Day. Again, they're looking at, they got their independence on May 14th, 1948, but they're looking at the religious holidays there. I mean, they usually use the calendar we do, but for holidays, they like to use the religious calendar. I remember Hanukkah one year, which usually occurs in December, actually occurring in very late November. But that's the next day. Memorial Day comes right the day before Independence Day. In other words, we get independence, but a lot of soldiers died for it, and then a lot of soldiers and people are still dying. Independence Day is designated to be on the 5th day of the Yah in the Hebrew calendar, the anniversary of the day on which Israeli independence was proclaimed. Again, for us, that's May 14, 1948, when David Ben-Gurion publicly read the Israeli Declaration of Independence. The corresponding Gregorian day was May 14, 1948. Now, Yom HaZikaron, which goes by the Jewish calendar, begins with a siren at 8 in the evening. That's Memorial Day. As soon as the siren is heard, Israeli citizens stop whatever they're doing, wherever they are, and stand firm to honor those they've lost. A 1-minute siren sounds at 8 p.m. and a 2-minute siren sounds at 11 a.m. on the next day. It's similar to the siren on Holocaust Memorial Day, which this year was Friday, January 27, 2023. People generally stop whatever they're doing, even when you're driving on the highway, and stand at attention while the sirens blare.
So what was the 11 a.m. time? What's that for? The next day, what's that?
I don't
siren
know. I don't know why they do that. This is what it looks like. It's Memorial Day. This also happens on Holocaust Remembrance Day. You stand, you get out of your cars. Now, some Orthodox have their own Holocaust Remembrance Day. The reason is Holocaust Remembrance Day comes at a festive time of year, Passover and stuff. So they have what they call the days of awe, or the days of mourning or something. Different time of the year, and they will not celebrate, but remember the Holocaust at that time to something that was established before the Holocaust even happened. I don't think that bothers too many Israelis. But especially the Memorial Day and everything, Independence Day, the Hasidim just go about their business like nothing's happened, and it really irritates a lot of the Israelis. Israel today is expensive, lots of tourists, and plenty of scams. Oh yeah, you go to Israel, you should see the scams. You go into a shop, especially Jerusalem. I've seen this film. You go into a shop and you buy, this is an ancient pottery. And you look on it, and in French it says made Marseille. It's roof tile that they use there. They will sell you all kinds of stuff saying it's some ancient artifact. I think it was made in Marseille was what I saw. I mean, they confronted these guys, and it's really something. Or a guy pulls out a map, you know, and when you're looking at the map, he knows how to reach into your wallet, which you're holding, and take some of the money out. One guy took out all the money and realized this guy's going to know his money's gone, so he said, "Here's your money." Before he took the map, you know, before the guy realized he'd been ripped off. But it is very interesting. Now, in the Mediterranean area, I first learned this when I spent a summer in Spain. They go very aggressively after tourists. You know, you're in Holland or Germany. I mean, you kind of look like everybody else. You're in the Mediterranean. They can spot a tourist a mile away. And maybe not so much in tourist places like Mallorca and stuff like that, where you got a lot of British people and others living. But especially like when I was in Barcelona, you're sort of targeted. And the scams, especially in Israel, because all the tourists coming in. They do have a good military, lots of people over 55 years old. The desert is blooming like a rose, and it's the highest tech nation on the planet. They are higher tech than we are. Lots of food production. Okay, where I was on Kibbutz Alanim in 1979, they had a sign up in Hebrew. We gathered 800 tons, I think they were pears. Now what's a ton? For us it's 2,000 pounds. If it's a metric ton, that's 1,000 kilograms, which is 2,200 pounds. That was one crop during just a few weeks. On one kibbutz out of these days 270 of them. A lot of agriculture. It's an incredible place. You can look at Leviticus 26, and it basically says when the rightful owners are there, it's going to do quite well. They're in the land. Remember, the land had decayed tremendously under the Turks, the Arabs. Theater, Tel Aviv has got more than London, second only to New York, more than the capitals of Europe. The Bible's...
Whoa, back up.
Whoa, okay. They got theater. In Tel Aviv, you got more than you've got in... Well, what is this?
Like you mean plays?
Yeah,
or movie
I guess...
theaters.
No, I think plays and stuff.
Okay.
I think that's what it meant.
Okay.
More than London, second only to New York. Yeah, more than the capitals of Europe. I think that means theater is typically plays and stuff, whereas theater, you know, I know it's a word with more than one meaning. I had an interesting thing. One of our teachers was talking, I think it was 1948, unless it was 67, but they're in a movie theater. And they're watching some show, and the guns go off. You don't know if it's part of the show, because they might be watching a Western, or if it's shooting outside. I mean, you got all kinds of stories like this. Like, I've worked in a prison for a year, I could tell, I'm not going to do this, I could tell war stories for hours, like they say. Well, anytime you've been in war, or just in some of these places, you've got your share of stories. And I think that was 48. In other words, you're watching a movie and you hear the gunshots. Is it part of the movie, or is it going on outside? Anyway, the Bible says, I will pour upon the house of David and upon the inhabitants of Jerusalem the spirit of grace and of supplications. And they shall look upon me whom they have pierced. And they shall mourn for him as one mourneth for his only son, and shall be in bitterness for him as one that is in bitterness for his firstborn. Yeah, when Christ comes back, they're going to recognize him. For the most part, it's going to take that. Any questions?
Yeah, you had something up there on there about democracy is straight or something. It's just everything. It is absolute democracy, like
On a kibbutz, or in the country.
in the country. I thought you had a slide there that said something about democracy.
Well, let's look.
You know, here in America, we're a democratic republic. We elect officials who represent us.
Well, they got that too in the Knesset.
Yeah.
That's probably the kibbutz. Oh, well, no, it's probably on the kibbutz.
It was right at the top of the slide.
Okay. So Israeli women.
You know.
Direct democracy on a kibbutz. Kibbutz, not the government of
Okay.
Israel, on a kibbutz. You can go, I mean, everyone votes. Okay, it's not a matter of, now maybe some of this changed. It's not a matter of electing a representative like you do in the Knesset. You vote yourself. That's direct democracy. And that's what they do. And they make decisions. If you ever see the movie, and remember I showed you some movies, that one with Chaim Topol in it, in black and white. He's the guy who played Fiddler on the Roof. I don't know if I showed that, but Salah Shabbati, I don't even think I showed that one. And it's not, it's sort of a comedy, but what it is, it's a spoof on the Israeli housing crisis. They've always had problems getting enough homes for all these Jews coming in. And they show this, they vote on things, and it's black and white, it's in Hebrew, it's subtitled in English. It's about a Jewish Egyptian family that comes to the country, probably in the 1940s. And it shows this, all the kibbutz members show up, and they vote. And it was a funny part where some guy wants them all to be quiet, and they're just talking, let's get this meeting going, and no one listens to them, and some woman comes in and just looks at them, and the whole place quiets down. But that one, yeah, they really do. They vote on things, direct democracy. And what I heard at the seminar, my second time there, in 1979, was that, you want to go to college, you argue, on a kibbutz. If I go for you send me to college for 2 years because I work in the children's houses, Bet Yeladim, I promise I will not leave this kibbutz for 2 years. In other words, withdraw my membership and leave. You send me for 4 years, to learn mechanics or something, I'll stay for at least 4 years. And they might say, we don't have money for you this year, so you come back next year, okay? Last year you didn't have money for me, what about this year? The most argumentative people on this planet are the Jews. And that's not an anti-Semitic trope, okay? I grew up with this. I would argue with my father, and he'd admit I was right, okay? He wouldn't say you're right, he'd say, Howard, you're all right. And he realized my argument was true. And it's the way it's done. Like the Northeast argue with your boss. If he's Jewish, you're probably not going to get fired for it. It's just a very different type of society. And there's a lot of, you argue your way to get into college. I don't know what it's like these days. When I understand now, 90% of Israelis go to college after they're done with the military duty.
90%?
90%.
Wow, that's great.
So it's become a very high-tech country. And that would be on part 14. But this direct democracy, now again, the kibbutz movement is becoming more and more like a covenanted community, but I believe they still have the direct democracy, the rotations. I mean, more and more just, you got your house and you're doing your own dishes and making your own food and working a job and maybe even driving out to kibbutz every day for a job and coming back. It's almost like a covenanted community. In the earlier days, it was all very communist, socialist. But the great thing was, we think of communists, we think of people trying to take you over. No, you joined because you wanted to. The hippie communes in America didn't work. They worked over there. It's the only place it's worked where you're not forced under the gun. If you want to take your population like in the Soviet Union or China and force them to live like this, that's one thing. But when people do it voluntarily, in a sense, some of them had no choice. You're coming from another country, escaping persecution. You often start out on the kibbutz.
Well, that's the way the Pilgrims started out.
But yeah,
communal, like that. But then they found that it didn't work because they had to put in the rule: if you don't work, you don't eat.
Yeah.
Because some people were sloughing off and letting others do all the work.
I know. You know why? It works. It didn't work. They're a bunch of Gentiles. Sorry if I just insulted all of you, but that's true. No, it's true. Jews are the only ones in the world that can do this.
Ah.
They're the only ones that have ever done it, except when you look at this. Read Peter Freuchen's famous book of the Eskimos. Okay? Talk to someone that has married a Vietnamese woman because he was over there in the 1960s fighting. You have these societies where everyone's kind of in a clan, and everything is communal, they actually do that too. So it's not that the Jews are the only ones who can do it. It just seems that way. If you let Peter Freuden's famous book of the Eskimos, he talks about, you go and you kill your food and you hang it up in a common storehouse. And maybe you're not supposed to really go for somebody else's, but much is done communally. And these are Eskimos in Greenland. I remember reading something, a guy married a Vietnamese woman, brought him back, he was there during the war. And she said, people, like relatives would babysit their kids. She says, I don't believe it. They expect me to pay them. If you're going up in a society where everyone's pretty much related, you're marrying within your clan, you can have this type of thing and it can work. Where there's much more of, I don't care whose is what, okay? There's been a lot of this. It tends to break down when nationhood becomes an issue. When multiculturalism, we're in America with all these different cultures living together, and they hate each other. For the most part. I lived in Brockton, Massachusetts. We had a Portuguese community, Cape Verdean community, Spanish community. I do remember one Chinese girl in my bus ministry. White community. No one gets, there's always this resentment. I don't quote some of what I heard because this is going public. The communities don't get along. And they really don't. Now, isn't as bad now in the U.S., but it's still there. People don't get along with other groups. But when you have an isolated group and everyone's the same, you can start going in this direction without as much resentment. And I don't know exactly how the Greenland Eskimos did things. He mentioned someone would take someone else's food, and but pretty much there's a lot more of that when you look at maybe groups that have, like the Montagnards up, if you ran into them in Southeast Asia during the war or something. When you have tribes living together, it can, I think, at times get like this from what little history I know about that type of thing. But when you start putting people from different groups together, it doesn't work. Remember, in the kibbutz, they're all Jews. Okay? And that's part of it. Part of it is because Jews have a sense of egalitarianism that Gentiles cannot understand. Moses was the one. Of course, God telling Moses, gather up the manna, and if you get too much, each one gets, I think it's an omer. If you get too much, you're not going to have an excess. If you get too little, you'll take that excess from somebody else. That's communism, baby, and that's what God's telling Moses to do. And Paul quotes it in the New Testament. Paul quotes it as something you're supposed to do when it comes to money. Rich churches, he would take the money and help the poor churches. Now, I'm not saying we should become communist. You can't, okay? Jewish people can work with that and succeed, at least for a while.
But
Acts 2 and Acts 4.
It was communal sharing, not communist, right?
Well,
communist to me, that's a bad word.
Well, it is because of what it is.
Communist is the word commune.
Yeah, but
it's communal sharing, and it can work. Well, we think of communism as the Russians threatening to nuke us.
Yeah.
Okay. But the
we think of it politically.
Yeah, problem with communism is it was forced on people who didn't want it. There's nothing Russian about communism. It was forced on the Russians. It's forced on the Chinese. That's not part of their culture. It was forced from the outside. It started in Germany.
Yeah.
But and it was exported. But the thing, and I am not, folks, I am not preaching communism. I'm just saying that this is a place where it has worked. And it probably has worked in other places where everyone's kind of the same. Some places, although the really extremes of the early kibbutzim, where your clothes became everybody's, I don't think any other culture has done that. If they have, I haven't heard about it. But they were very idealistic in full-fledged communism. Like I said, my kibbutz in May Day flew the red flag of communism along with the Israeli flag, 1979. But it's not, we think of communism as something being forced on you, which it usually is. It's just that there's a kind of sharing, and they did try it. The early kibbutzim were like this. We'll see that in the next presentation in more detail. And it didn't, people want their own things, okay? If I get a sweater I like, I really want it. So, but there is more sharing amongst people that are of the same ethnic background. Any other questions?
Mm-hmm.